Well, we're back, and our guest on this segment is David Ulbrich, who is an expert in warfare. David, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I need to point out right off the top, David's co-author of this book, this incredibly detailed book that, do you use this in class here at Rogers State?
I have, yes.
That you co-authored with Matthew, I'm sorry, well, that is, is it Muehlbauer?
Muehlbauer,
Muehlbauer.
yes.
We're going to be talking about Battle of the Bulge in just a couple of minutes, but first, a little bit about you. You and I have become friends, and at least you take my phone calls. But I'm a little curious, how did you get into the business of warfare? What drew you into becoming a professor of this?
Well, I was an oops baby. I was born when my father was 50 years old, and he had been a World War II veteran. And so I grew up, and he'd be telling me stories about his experiences as a bombardier in southern Italy in 44 and 45. And he wasn't, I'm sure he didn't tell me all the bad stuff, but he told me enough to get me interested. So I sort of hardwired to be interested in history, although because he was a Great Depression era baby, he wanted me to become an engineer. And I tried that for 1 year and then shifted to history. Physics and calculus just, I just couldn't handle it.
In this book, you match branches of service with what they were facing. There is a flavor that comes with each skirmish that you cover that, boy, it answers a lot of questions just if you just skim it. But then when you go back and read it and take the time to follow it, all of a sudden you can smell the gunpowder.
Well, thank you. It took about 2.5 years of my life, and it was good when it was done. And I had a very good dissertation advisor at Temple University that taught me how to write well.
You lecture still at West Point?
On occasion, and at the Army War College.
So you're considered a recognized expert in your field?
I think so, yes.
Okay, David. We're going to be talking today about the Battle of the Bulge. If you would set it, well, let me give you one little tidbit here first. My dad fought in the Battle of the Bulge. My mother's brother fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He was in the Howitzer Division. And my dad had been in the Army Air Corps when orders came down, I don't care what they're doing, ship them to us. We need them, for this upcoming battle. They had no idea it was going to be such a battle. Dad said when he landed, they had no coats. He wore shoes. He didn't have time to grab his boots. None of them did. It was that fast a deployment. So the first 2 weeks, they had no coats and no boots. And they were given M1s and sent out on the firing line. But that was typical of the times when Eisenhower amassed the Allies and said, let's go get them. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. We have some video here to show a little bit about the conditions. And I have to tell you up front, some of the things you're going to see are not that friendly. This is a layout. What, are we in blue?
Yes.
German forces are in red. Are these American GIs?
Yes, they're combat engineers that are wiring those trees for demolition to block roads. And that's an engineered bulldozer moving a destroyed German tank out of the way. Mm-hmm. Those are German soldiers, and that's the massacre at Malmedy, one of the horrific experiences in the Battle of the Bulge. And that's another photograph of the massacre at Malmedy.
Dad talked about, I've heard him talk about this several times over the years, when they were under shelling, sometimes it would go on 3 and 4 nights, all night long. You couldn't get in a hole deep enough. And when some of the shells would come in and explode at treetop level, it sent pieces of the bomb or the armament and pieces of the tree. So it was a double whammy, and the Germans knew that.
Splinters, yeah, the splinters, that could do as much damage as the shrapnel.
How many men did we lose in the Battle of the Bulge?
about 90,000 casualties, of which about 20,000 were killed in action. The others were wounded or missing or captured. And the Germans lost about a little over 120,000 killed, wounded, or missing in action or taken prisoner.
How important was this battle?
If Hitler had won the battle, i.e. if he had made it to, say, Antwerp, I think he would have, that's a port city in Belgium, about 150 miles from the front lines. I think he would have slowed down the war a few months, but he had this delusional goal that if he made it to Belgium, to Antwerp, he would split the British and the American forces, with Montgomery being up north, and the British would make a separate peace, which was nothing short of delusional. By then, the British were pot committed. They were going to see this through to the end. But Adolf Hitler, by then, there had been the assassination attempt, and he was on drugs and everything else, so he had a lot of mental and physical issues, and no general wanted to stand up to him and tell him that this was a bad idea.
You know, I have to tell you, quite frankly, I find that even though I was not involved, I am personally offended by some of the shows that are running on cable about World War II, and passed off as the way things really were. And they use old footage, which lends an air of authenticity to it. But they're wrong in so many instances. They're wrong about the planning. They're wrong about the morale. They're wrong about troop movements. They're things that are encapsulated in these. And now they got another one going called The Search for Hitler, which is under the premise Hitler got away and moved to Argentina.
Yeah. I think part of that is whether or not they have professional historians and or veterans that are consultants. I also think part of it is, for whatever reason, people think, the producers or the directors or the writers think they need to change history. They need to work in some fictional characters, when the real thing's plenty interesting and plenty exciting and plenty horrifying. You don't need to work any extra characters. That's where I think the documentary, actually the miniseries by HBO, Band of Brothers, is probably minute for minute, pound for pound, the most realistic World War II experience movie that's been made.
I've got that series at home, and I have to tell you, there are times, my dad wouldn't talk about it much until toward the end of his life, when he started to feed me tidbits as he felt comfortable doing so. But some of the things he talked about, when did the Battle of the Bulge actually start?
In the morning of December 16th, 1944, just during a blizzard, which was one of the coldest and worst, winters on recorded history in Europe. So Adolf Hitler took advantage of the weather because he didn't want to deal with American air power, their aircraft. So the weather was overcast, which made it safer for his tanks to move across country. It also took the Americans completely by surprise. There was a complete breakdown in American intelligence gathering. And so Hitler's amassing 200,000 soldiers just over the line and 2,000 tanks, and the American intelligence gathering and spies and so on didn't recognize that. So that was a big mistake on the American intelligence side.
It brings to mind the scene from Patton when George C. Scott tells the minister or the chaplain, talk to God about a clear day. We need a clear day to get those planes in there.
Yeah, that's a few days later. That's about a week later. But yeah, it started December 16th, and the Germans overran the 2 or 3 divisions that were online.
When did it end?
Usually they say January 15th, so that would be 72 years ago this week.
And parents and sons and daughters, aunts and uncles were left without any knowledge, without any idea of what these men were going through until days, in some cases weeks afterward, because there was no real form of communication back in the States.
They wouldn't have had immediate communication. Obviously, there would have been censors and so on as they were writing at home. But things were moving so quickly, as you told about your father, that by the time the newsreels were made, by the time news got back, it might be 5 days later, but in 5 days, things could have changed. There would have been thousands of American soldiers that in small groups or individually would have literally fought to the death along those front lines as the Germans were overrunning them.
You know, sometime when you have the time, and I know you're very busy, but when you have time, Dad told some stories of when after the battle, of things happened that were incredibly funny. You know, those oddball type things which you could appreciate only if you were in a MASH outfit. So we'll talk about this sometime when you're here and have plenty of time to talk about it. Listen, thanks for coming by.
Thank you, sir.
Good to see you again.
It's been enjoyable.
Hopefully we'll have you back in the near future.
I look forward to it.
You're the man. Short break. We'll be back with more. As a matter of fact, we're going to be talking about the Oklahoma Aquarium right after this.